series of the Smithers podcast. Today, I'm joined by James Wojtyk, who has recently written our most recent Lifecycle of Banknotes report. Hi, James. How are you today?
I'm great, Eve. How are you?
Yeah, I'm very well, thank you. So let's jump straight into this really interesting topic. Can you tell us why it's so interesting?
Well, I think one of the things about banknotes is, in the next 5 years, in a lot of the interviews that I did, people in the industry, also central bankers, et cetera, really think that there's going to be, a bit of a disruption in the industry. And when I say disruption, that's not necessarily a negative connotation. It's actually very positive. And it's generally going to be related to the technologies that the banknote industry is going to adopt. And because, with all the different technologies like AI, et cetera, that leads to so many different things that are going to impact and enhance the banknote industry, from design, substrate security features, production, post-production, circulation, distribution, and even end of life of the banknote. So there are a lot of really interesting changes coming to the banknote industry. And I think in the report that we've just written, they're really outlined there. And it's a really interesting roadmap as well.
So you touched on technology quickly there. What other key trends are we seeing in terms of this market at the moment?
So, I mean, really the focus of the whole report is how technology is going to change the industry. We definitely see, of course, there's, new and improved security features because it's that arms race with the counterfeiters. They do one thing and then the central bank has to do another to design better security features. But, from a technology perspective, you're seeing, greater emphasis on sustainability in and amongst the industry. A really, really big one is, of course, artificial intelligence. Everyone's using it, obviously, ChatGPT now, et cetera. But, when I look at all the different technologies that I report on in the document, I think artificial intelligence is the one that touches on every single aspect, from design, substrate, security features, et cetera, because it's just so ubiquitous right now and the potential is vast, still quite untapped. And that comes to one of the other issues with the banknote industry. A lot of people generally say that the banknote industry is not really conducive to change, that it is very conservative. And yet all the people that I spoke to, and even with my time at the Bank of Canada, everyone is pushing the envelope and trying to adapt these technologies as quickly as possible because it's going to make it better, optimum cost savings as well. So there are a number of very interesting benefits there to adopt these new technologies.
And you mentioned sustainability briefly. Are there currently any sort of drivers that are affecting sustainability in terms of the life cycle of banknotes?
Well, I think one of the things about sustainability is, when you look at different substrates, for example, people, countries switching from paper to polymer. There's actually been a couple of countries that actually switched back to paper as well. Interesting. There's an interesting map in the report, so you can, look at it there. But for the most part, sustainability is really once again, in every single aspect of the banknote industry, it is quite important because, and that's what feeds in once again to, the net zero 2050 climate action, climate change, et cetera. Everyone wants to be a lot more environmentally responsible. And it's not just greenwashing too, because, the central banks and the suppliers and the print works, et cetera, they are really talking the talk. They are reducing their emissions, et cetera. Companies like G&D and CCL, they're looking at innovative ways of recycling their product. Now, I know G&D is coming up with a cotton, fiber banknote extractor that's going to then allow, recycling of actual, cotton fibers. And so I think to me, the technology that they're, investing in and innovating in is something that's really going to drive the market, once again, from cradle to grave, as we've always said, right? So that's the one thing about sustainability. And then the other thing about sustainability is that, banknotes are just lasting longer. And unfortunately, I want to say unfortunately, it's just a reality because cash usage is going down, right? And because cash usage is going down, banknotes are lasting out there longer. And so, there's a lot less, product turnover, et cetera. So these are the other things that the industry also has to grapple with.
Absolutely. You mentioned there that cash usage is going down and that cashless payments have gained traction in sort of more recent years. What areas have reinforced the role of cash in society?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question because, everyone's always saying the doom and gloom of cash and then, it's going to go down to zero, et cetera. Well, you see a lot of countries all over the world mandating and putting out regulations that, their citizens have to have access to cash. And that's very important. And I think things that really bring it to the forefront are, when there's a disaster or some sort of crisis. The recent power outage in Spain, in Canada a couple of years ago, half of our country went down because one of our telcos, flipped the wrong switch, and people realized that the only option at that point for 8 or 12 hours is cash. And so that's something, and people are really starting to, take more advantage of that. Cash is value. Economic uncertainty is also another big one, and everyone's reading the news about tariffs, etc. In times of economic uncertainty, people do, maintain, they hoard cash a little bit more and use it for its value because that is something that actually is of value, intangible, right? So that's another thing as well from the cash usage. So, cash usage is going down. All the projected forecasts are there. There's no denying it, but it's going to, pretty much reach a steady state. And like I said, countries like Sweden, well, your own country as well, England, have mandated now that people have to have the access to cash. Canada as well, while we're closing down, some ATMs, the Bank of Canada is mandated that every citizen has access to cash, right? So very, very important.
Absolutely. And I suppose as one final question, what's the biggest thing or the biggest change that we're going to see in the life cycle of banknotes in the next 5 years or so?
Well, that was an interesting question. I think I got a different answer from everyone I interviewed for this report. But one of the things that does change very quickly is, of course, cash usage, right? We're going to see that change, and that can change on pretty much the drop of a dime, really, to use a coin as opposed to a banknote analogy. But the other thing that you're going to see too, I think, is a bit of an emergence in terms of how central banks and the whole banking industry deals with the digital, complementary technologies. CBDCs, for example, and even the fast payment systems and Apple Pay and other sorts. They have to learn to integrate. It's an interesting concept that when you think of technology is going to change something, and all the technologies that are outlined in the report, and we talked about the changes in the report, they're all complementary. They're not going to replace, banknotes writ large, right? But they're going to complement each other. I think about CBDCs, they're going to complement physical banknotes. When I look at the potentially new types of banknotes, like what they call the physical digital interface or FIGITAL, right? That is going to complement the existing, physical banknotes. It's not going to replace them, not by a long shot. And that because A, people are too familiar with it, and B, the industry would really have to turn itself upside down to just completely switch over, right? And the other thing that's also not going to change are the security threats from counterfeiters, right? That's the thing that, inherently central banks have to be, always, on the outlook for, because of the fact that, counterfeiting, while it may be a very small value. It's interesting to actually compare counterfeit value of physical banknotes to, say, credit card fraud, for example. The credit card fraud amount is much, much, much larger. But, for counterfeiting of banknotes, it really is a national security threat, because as soon as the society and citizens start losing confidence in their currency, it really becomes quite problematic for the central bank and for the functioning government of that country.
I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about the M&As happening in this industry at the moment.
Well, it's interesting. When I was at the Bank of Canada for the last 3 years, we really did see a bit of a marked transition in terms of having a bunch of different individual entities designing, substrates, security features, et cetera. Has now been a bit more of a consolidation trend in the industry. Crane, for example, has gone on a bit of a buying spree, Authentics as well. And so in many respects, people say consolidation is not necessarily good for the industry, but I think it's going to be very beneficial for the industry, and so do many others as well, because you're going to have a completely vertically integrated design and flow chain. And I think that's very, very important from a capability perspective. Secondly, people who are more interested in, say maybe switching or changing a security feature or switching substrates, there's a one-stop shop. They'll be able to know the one place to go as opposed to, 5 or 10 different options. So that merger and acquisition activity is actually extremely important and going to be quite beneficial to the banknote industry.
So if we just jump back to AI quickly, we sort of mentioned how it can help the industry. What are the ways that it's sort of going to hinder this market?
Well, I think one of the things that everyone is really talking about is how, the counterfeiters could use artificial intelligence. And I think that's one thing that no one in the industry has really explored quite yet. And once again, while AI, it's like that double-sided coin where on the one side, it's really a great technology to use. On the flip side, it can be abused as well. And so, artificial intelligence, when we look at, counterfeiters, basically, it's once again something that central banks and all the suppliers are going to have to stay one step ahead of, just because of the fact that no one really knows where that is going to take, and how the the bad guys or how it's going to be used nefariously against central banks.
Thank you so much, James. It's been really interesting to chat with you. Our latest report, The Life Cycle of Banknotes, is available to buy today on our website, or give us a call.